Welcome to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast, where developing a long-lasting, happy relationship is the status symbol to achieve. And following my tools is one path to help get you there. I'm your host, Dr. Wyatt Fisher, a licensed psychologist specializing in couples counseling. If you want to improve your communication so that you have more love and less conflicts, download my app today, Keep the Glow KTG, and start with 2 weeks free. Also, be sure to click the subscribe button for future episodes and follow me on social at Dr. Wyatt Fisher. Okay, so today we have a special guest. We have Michelle Grosser. Michelle is a nervous system and somatic coach, and she is the host of the Calm Mom podcast. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you for being on the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast today.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, this is great. So what exactly is a nervous system and somatic coach?
So I help people learn how to regulate their nervous systems, and we do that through body-based practices. So really the somatics part is just learning how to get out of our heads and into our bodies and have tools, body-based tools to bring regulation to our system.
Okay, super. So I'm sure you don't know this, but what I teach with couples I work with, and my audience has heard me talk about this, is I teach a diamond approach for when couples start to get flooded and they get into fight, flight, or freeze, that they watch for their symptoms, their physiological symptoms, and they call out the word flooded, and then they go their separate ways for 20 minutes up to 24 hours. So there's a cap. They wait till they get out of fight, flight, or freeze, and then they come back together and use a tool that I use called the Reunite tool to help them work through the conflict. So where I see this coming in is when they call flooded. Well, first of all, helping them call flooded, helping them recognize their symptoms, and then second, how do they get out of fight, flight, or freeze when they're trying to de-flood?
Perfect. So, I love it so much. This is like the perfect intersection.
Yes, it is.
So when it comes to like noticing, we in our somatic work, we call those our somatic cues, right? And we all have them. We all have different ways in which our body communicates to us that it is becoming dysregulated, right? I think of it when I talk about my own somatic cues like a stoplight. I know when I'm in the green light zone and I have access to all the parts of my brain and I feel great and I can see, my husband's perspective and he can see mine and I can access my highest levels of communication. And like, that's when everything's copacetic, right? But then when I start to get into that yellow light zone and I'm starting to feel that flooding sensation come into my body, we have to be growing in awareness of how that shows up in our body. So it can show up in so many different ways. I know for me, when I start to feel, we call it activated or dysregulated or flooded, my jaw is the first thing that will just kind of clench shut. And it makes it really hard for me to communicate, obviously. But I'll notice like my tongue is kind of pressed to the roof of my mouth. I feel a lot of tension in my jaw and my neck and my shoulders. And maybe my shoulders will even kind of come up by my ears. My voice will change. Like it's different for everybody. When some people start to get activated, they'll get really loud and maybe they'll start speaking more quickly. When I get activated, I actually start speaking really slow, which is a cue to myself and probably everyone in my home that it's time for me to take a timeout. And it can show up in different ways, right? Maybe you notice your temperature changing, your face gets red, your breathing changes, you clench your hands, you get a lump in your throat. But just noticing what your particular somatic cues are cues that you are entering that yellow light zone. And if you don't take action and intervene, you're going to get into that red light, which is like where you're just flooded, right? And screaming flooded.
Yeah. So what would you recommend to someone who doesn't even know what awareness means, and they're like, oh, how do I become aware? It just happens. I just get upset. Like they've never even heard of this before. What would be like some practical, like, here's step one to start becoming more aware? Like, what would this even look like to start introducing this?
Yeah. So first of all, awareness, when we grow in our awareness, it's just where we're placing our intention. So if 20 minutes ago you had never heard of a somatic cue, right? And you're like, wait, hold on a second. You're different now. Now you have an awareness, and it's just going to be a matter of practice and consistency, right? And noticing, hey, what's going on in my body? And first, right, this is part of a practice of rewiring our brain to grow in that awareness. So the first few times you might miss it, right? And then you do just like miss it and you have a blowout or something. But I promise you, once you've cooled down, if you take a minute to think about it, you might notice, oh, wow, right before I kind of, said that thing that I regret, I noticed that my breathing was kind of going faster and I was just kind of like pacing around the house and had all this energy going through me. And then as you start to grow in that awareness, you'll be able to catch it sooner and sooner and sooner to the point where the gap between you feeling that somatic cue and then you saying or doing something starts to grow. And that's where you have more space, to put, I'm sure, all the practices that you teach into practice.
Yeah, I really like that because one thing I tell my couples a lot is the goal is catching yourself earlier and earlier in that flooded process. And even to view it as like pre-flooded. Like let's try to
Yeah,
catch it before it really gets like out of hand because then the impulse control gets lower and lower the more flooded you get. And so trying to catch those pre-flooded areas is the key. And I agree that when you first start out, you don't even notice it until after it's full blown flooded and things are out of hand. But the more you work at it, the now I've caught it 2/3 of the way. Now I've caught it 50% of the way. Now I've caught it a third of the way. And so that's like a growth area, I think, for all of us is to keep catching it earlier and earlier because then we have more self-control.
that's exactly right. And I think even when we're not in the moment and experiencing activation, even just like starting a daily practice of a daily body scan. I do it before I even get out of bed. Like as soon as like consciousness hits, before I even open my eyes, I take, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds. And I'll just start at the top of my head and just scan down my whole body and just see what I'm noticing that day. And some days I wake up and I'm just noticing like, oh man, there's like a heaviness in my chest tonight. I don't know what that is, or a pit in my stomach. Oh, maybe it's that meeting I have later. And my legs feel restless today. I'm going to go for a walk this morning. But just a really simple practice, like a body scan. You can do it before you get out of bed. You could do it while you're making dinner, while you're driving, and just starting to attune to the communication of your body. That'll also help grow that awareness for when you are more activated in the moment.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I would imagine that could also provide some valuable content of if I do have that pit in my stomach because of that stressful thing at work, and then later I have a conflict with my partner, how much was that stress I was already experiencing contributing to my short temper with my partner? So I would wonder if it would help you own more of your side of the equation if you're doing this body scan and getting in touch with what else is fueling your emotions that day.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think as a society, I don't, our body's always communicating and we're just not really taught how to listen, right? Or we have to slow down enough to listen. That's a part of it too. And I think so often instead of listening to the messenger, we're so quick to silence it, right? Or so quick to kill the messenger, like pop an Advil if I have a headache or, whatever it is, I'm tired. I'm just going to have another cup of coffee and not paying attention to these cues. And a lot of those are relational, right? Issues that bring up somatic responses in our body that are signals like, hey, you got to have that conversation. Or, hey, you got to address this thing you're avoiding. Or, hey, you got to set that boundary. Or, hey, you got to whatever it is. But our body knows.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can relate to this because for me, growing up, I was raised with two people who were raised on farms. And so their work ethic was gigantic. And so my sister and I were raised working a lot. And so I'm guilty of ignoring how I feel and I'll just keep on working. And like I'll be hungry and I'll just keep working, or I'm exhausted, I'll just keep working. I can tolerate a high pain tolerance because of that. However, then it can come at a cost, right? Where then it may lead to me getting sick or, feeling burned out. So even in that kind of setting, it's probably helpful. It's like, wait a minute, what are my cues? And do I need to pump the brakes and have some more self-care instead of just ignoring how I'm feeling and keep working?
That's right. I think that's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. I also like the point you said with afterwards reflecting. Like, okay, we had the blowout, we had the argument. Now let me think back, not just to the argument, but before the argument. Like, what were my symptoms? How can I learn from that previous conflict we had about my own symptoms so I can watch for those better next time? Because there's so much data after conflicts that is very rich. And that's an angle I think a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I guess this kind of segues into like, what do we do when we are flooded or kind of feel it coming? But the sooner that we can catch it, right? What's so interesting is that we talk a lot about like mindset, and I'm sure a lot of the things that, scripts or all this stuff. And I love when you explained your framework that there's time to separate, right? And time to like regulate, which is what which is what I teach, and then come back together and figure this thing out. Because our nervous system, which is what's activated when we're in fight or flight, it doesn't speak a verbal language. So we can have all of these like scripts or mantras or affirmations or like things like I've told myself before when I felt very activated, like, just calm down. It's not as big of a deal as you're making it. But my nervous system, my body does not understand that form of communication. That's not how those nerves receive information. I have to communicate safety to my body. Ultimately, that's what we're communicating, right? Through movement, through breath, through sound, gentle and appropriate touch. These are all tools that we want to have, because just simply using our mindset work or scripts or affirmations, one, our body doesn't understand that type of communication. And then second, what we're seeing as we study the nervous system is that only 20% of all of the messaging happening in our body, which is what our nervous system does, right? It's always sending messages, gathering information, sending messages. Only 20% of all those messages go from our head down to our body, top down approach. So again, all the mindset work, all the scripts, all the stuff we know, only 20% of what's going on in our body. 80%, the other 80% of all of the messaging going on about, am I safe? Like, is this person trustworthy? Like, all the things that are going on subconsciously are from our body up to our brain. So if we're telling ourselves, right, it's okay, I can have this conversation, I can find some self-control, or I can see things from another perspective, or all these things. If our body's not buying it, if our body doesn't feel, hey, I don't think that person's trustworthy, hey, I don't think they had the best intention, hey, whatever it is, if our body's perceiving some sort of threat, it's going to be really hard for us to de-escalate and come back to that place of regulation. So when we can combine both, like, that's where the power happens, right? To have the right thinking, the space, the right thinking, but then also have body-based tools to bring the safety to our body. You'll notice you can actually regulate your nervous system in like 60, 90 seconds. And once you start putting these tools into practice, and your nervous system will become more efficient. It'll understand, okay, this is actually safe. And then it's like back in my learning brain, right? I have access to my prefrontal cortex again. I can speak and think clearly. Let's give this a shot. I'm ready.
So you spoke about, what was it? You said there was like 3 categories, I think you said. Like, here's 3 ways to deflood, 3 categories, 3 types or approaches.
Okay.
Could you walk us through those 3 and what some examples are for each of those 3 approaches to deflood?
Yeah, sure. So there are probably dozens, maybe, I don't know, maybe even like hundreds of ways.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's so many tools. So if you're listening, I have a resource of just regulation resources. It's just like a PDF I'm happy to share with you guys. And you can also just Google like nervous system regulation tools,
Sure.
and things will pop up, somatic regulation tools. But some that I like to teach. So a few of the categories, I guess, movement, right? Our body responds really well to movement. So if we're starting to feel like we're getting into fight or flight, or we're feeling really activated, what does that feel like in our body? Well, maybe we're starting to have these racing thoughts, right? And all of a sudden, all the what ifs and like all the things are coming through. That wasn't fair. I can't believe it, or whatever. Maybe it's a lot of anxiety that you're feeling about something. Maybe it's anger, right? Maybe we're really mad and angry about something that doesn't feel right. Maybe we're just like kind of edgy and irritable someday, right? And it's just like kind of activated in that sense. When all that energy is coursing through our body and we're in fight or flight, I mean, if you just think about fight or flight, like the name, every cell in our body when we're in fight or flight is primed for movement. Every cell in our body is saying, I want to run or I want to fight. So when we feel that, and then we want to just calm down, right? I'm so activated and I'm just going to go sit in my bedroom and breathe and sit still. We're kind of suppressing all the urge, the natural impulse in our body to move. So if that resonates with any of you, like, it would be so much more effective to go, grab the pillow off your bed and just slam it on the floor 5 times, right? Or just go for a walk around the block. Or sometimes I'll even just, like, if I'm feeling anxious or activated, I'll just start shaking out my body. Like, I'll stand in my office and shake out my arms, shake out my legs, just kind of maybe even put a song on and just wiggle and move and shake. And then, 30, 60, 90 seconds later, when I kind of feel the shift in my nervous system and a lot of that energy has escaped, then I can do a few deep breaths. Then I could do like a little I don't know, 5-minute meditation, or then I could, bring in some soothing practices that will help me come back. But first, relieving and releasing a lot of that activating fight or flight energy. So those are different ways to move.
Let me pause you right there if I could. I love the movement approach personally also. And I've also read that when you are in fight or flight or freeze, the worst thing to do is actually freeze, which is I'm just sitting still, I'm not doing anything. Because there is that I'm getting chased by a lion, kind of impulse. And so I got to run, like I got to get out of here, which is why a lot of people flight, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people get worried in this diamond approach is, well, if we have this time away, my partner will never come back and talk this out. So I have to keep pursuing them. And so the stretch for both partners there, if you're the pursuer, is not pursuing. And if
Yeah.
you're the withdrawer, is keeping your commitment that you're going to come back within 24 hours to talk it out. So it's a challenge, for both partners. But I love the movement idea because I mean, I can relate as well. So, if I get flooded in my own life, if I go out for a walk in the beginning of the walk, I don't even know what I'm thinking and feeling yet. It's just like a jumble. But by the end of the walk, I have clarity and I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm feeling. Now I know what hit me wrong. Now I know what I want to say. But before that walk, I wasn't at that place. But after the walk, I am.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't take that long. And I do the same thing. And for me, half the time when I get back, I'm like, man, that wasn't even as big of a deal as I thought it was just 20 minutes ago, right? It's like there's just
Yep.
something that happens. And with walking in particular, that rhythmic motion using both sides of our body, right? The bilateral movement of taking steps with one foot and then the other, swinging our arms the way that we do. Bilateral movement does something in our brain that actually activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is how we calm and soothe ourselves. So even just that like walking rhythm changes our brain chemistry so we can actually come back and like talk about these things once we've cooled down.
That's interesting. That reminds me of research I've read on being out in nature, green space, lowers
Yeah.
anxiety, lowers depression, increases creativity, increases focus on top of if you're walking. So then you got the benefit of the bipedal motion on top of if you're walking in green space, then it's a double benefit.
Powerful. Yeah.
Yeah,
And what I love
interesting.
about all these tools is like we all have access to this, right? Like you don't have to go
Yeah,
buy anything to regulate your nervous system. You don't have to go out and like join a course. It's like back to the basics.
yeah,
Really, really basics. Awesome.
awesome. Yeah, and then what's the other major category, or maybe one or two other major or
Yeah.
top tools you'd recommend to calm down?
Yeah. So breath is really powerful, right? When we are in fight or flight, we know that, I mean, just think about running, right? Our breaths are really short, they're really shallow, they're really quick. That further indicates that there's some sort of threat to our nervous system. So when we can counteract that and be intentional about having slow, deep breaths, particularly with our exhale, that also activates our parasympathetic nervous system and helps us come back to this place of regulation. So my favorite breath, and this is another thing, you can just go on YouTube and be like, breath work for calm or how whatever you want to look for. And there's so many things and kind of play around and see what works. But one of the ones that I teach the most frequently and use myself because it's so efficient and it's so powerful is called a physiological breath. And the way that it works, you can do this anywhere. And really, most of my clients will report that within just 2 to 3 breaths, they'll feel a shift in the state of their nervous system. And the way that it works is you breathe in through your nose as deep as you can until it feels like your lungs are completely full of air. And then right at the top of that breath, you do one more quick inhale through your nose and then a slow exhale through your mouth as long as you can extend it. So you're just breathing in through your nose until it feels like your lungs are completely full all the way at the top. One more quick inhale and you'll just notice like your shoulders will drop, right? That tension in your chest will release in just a few breaths. So that's a really great one to have in your back pocket. You can play around with it and just see what you notice. And then I guess another thing I'd love to share too is for those of you listening who do tend to go into freeze mode, right? Because when we're in fight or flight, that's an activation of our sympathetic nervous system, which is like the gas pedal in our body. But when we're in freeze, that's kind of the other extreme. That's the brake in our nervous system. We call it a dorsal vagal collapse. And that's where our body, we all have different ways we respond to stress, right? So a lot of us go into fight or flight, but for a lot of us, we've been patterned, or our nervous system has found that the safest, most effective, preservation mechanism is to just freeze. And that's our best chance for survival. So if you're someone who you notice you start to get activated and you just, right, you freeze, like you go blank, you can't even think of your words, they're not coming out, you feel like you can't even really move. Maybe you feel like you have an out of body experience. I have a lot of clients who report that. They're like, I feel like I'm starting to get defensive, and then all of a sudden it's like I'm not even there anymore. Right? Like I'm watching this whole argument from the outside. So maybe you dissociate, or you feel really disconnected, or you're just kind of burnt out. There too, man, getting out of your head and all your like thinking and everything and getting into your body is so powerful to shift you out of that state of freeze and bring you back up into a place of regulation. So what does that look like? That could look like havening. You just cross your arms and kind of squeeze your shoulders and your arms down, bringing safety to your body, and just noticing the sensations of squeezing up and down your arms as you kind of hug yourself. It could be body tapping. So you just make a fist with your hand and just kind of tapping all over your body, all over your arms and your legs at whatever pressure feels good, but really noticing that sensation. Like, what does it feel like when I'm making contact? And just that, the change of your focus from all the stories going on up here into your body and the sensations, and noticing what's happening in your body is really regulating. It could be just orienting to where you're at. Like, I think, a lot of us, we've seen like your five senses, and it's like, what are 5 things I'm seeing, or 4 things I'm hearing, and 3 things I'm tasting, and just kind of go through that. Just bringing your awareness back to the present. Being in the present is really regulating for our nervous system and will help us come back. So those are some of my favorite ones. Another last one that I'll share too is that our nervous system is really sensitive to temperature changes. That's why, like, you hear things like, the ice baths and all these things being the rage, right? Because that cold temperature can activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So if you don't have an ice bath, like I don't have an ice bath, man, just like sometimes when I need to just shift, or like I can't get out of my head, and it's, I'm starting to feel really activated, like grab some ice cubes and just hold them in your hand, or rub them on the inside of your wrist. You can just splash cold water on your face, or dunk your face in a bowl of ice water if you're able. Even grabbing like a bag of frozen fruit or vegetables out of your freezer and holding it on the back of your neck. Your vagus nerve runs from your brainstem down to all your major organs. So just holding that there will help to activate your vagus nerve, which then activates your parasympathetic nervous system and help to shift back to regulation. So many quick things. And I would just encourage you, to just try them, because to a certain extent, it's everybody responds differently to different resources, right? Sure. Try something and it works, awesome. And if you don't, it's just information. Try something else the next time until you've got a couple. Yeah.
Yes. And the reason we're talking about this and the purpose behind it is so that you do not do relational damage, because when you are getting flooded and you're in fight, flight, or freeze, that's when the most damage occurs in your relationship, because you say things that are more hurtful. You say things that maybe you would filter better if you weren't flooded. You threaten things, and that creates emotional scar tissue that makes it harder and harder to rebound from. And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, who cares? Why should I care if I get flooded? That's why you should care. You should care because the more you have interactions with your partner when you're flooded, the more you're damaging your relationship. And so that's why it's so important to listen to what Michelle is talking about, to listen to your body, catch those pre-flooded symptoms, and then intentionally take that break to deflood so that you can come back together when you're both calm and talk through the conflict for resolution. So I think that's important, right, for everyone to hear, is that this is really important because this is going to prevent a lot of relational damage. And a lot of people don't buy into that, and they think, oh, what's the big deal? It's okay if I yell if I'm mad. You may think that, but your partner probably does not think that, right? And that's not going to lead to any progress in your relationship if it's just a yelling match. That's going to lead to a lot of hurt feelings, things you regret saying, and then that's the kind of stuff that's hard to recover from.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the whole idea of the ice. I've read that before as part of DBT training. For people who have a lot of strong emotions and they're struggling regulating, that one of those strategies is exactly what you said, which is stick your face in a bucket of ice or ice pack on your neck, because it simulates like you're swimming in cold water and it lowers your heartbeat right away. So it calms you down. Yeah, and it's interesting. All these techniques, you mentioned this in the beginning, but all of them is don't focus on what you're thinking. Like get out of
Yeah,
the thoughts and just focus on doing something with your body. Because
right.
once you tend to the body, get out of fight or flight or freeze, then your blood flow is gonna go back up to your head, and then you can start thinking again.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, it's just worth noting that, a lot of these tools are in the moment tools, right? And it's like they're valuable and it's really important, I think, to have them. We all have needs for band-aids in the moment, right? When we cut ourselves. But
Yeah.
the bigger picture is really to take a look at like, hey, why am I getting so dysregulated? Why am I shifting into fight or flight to begin with? And there's so many different factors there, but you also want to make sure that you're caring for your nervous system in a holistic way, because that's really going to be the foundation before you can implement all of these things that you learn, on this podcast or about communication or marriage or whatever. You want to have a healthy and ultimately resilient nervous system. So it actually takes a lot more for you to become triggered into fight or flight, right? You have the capacity to handle more. And that's ultimately where you can, make a big amount of progress, and you're not always resorting to these little in the moment tools.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because you got to address the base, right? The base might be I have unresolved trauma from my upbringing and my partner's triggering it. And so I'm already half flooded, right? When they have certain behavior, or I have this history with my partner where there's a lot of resentments and we haven't resolved them. And so it doesn't take much for me to kind of hit the ceiling, right? Or I'm just really stressed in life and the kids are crazy and my job is crazy. And so I'm already kind of maxed. And then you say the wrong thing and boom, like we're off to the races. So addressing those base areas, like you're saying, will really help, because then instead of just going from like 80 to 20, if you could start more at like 10 or 20 or 30, it takes a lot longer to get up to 80, right? Or a lot
That's
longer to get up to 100 if your base level is more calm and relaxed, compared if your base level is already elevated to 80. It doesn't take much to get up to 100.
that's right. Yep. We all have a limited capacity to handle the things that are coming at us every day. And it changes day to day, right? My bandwidth changes day to day depending on what's going on. And, am I sleeping? Am I eating, like the basics? So
Yeah.
really being aware of like, what are the things that are expanding or contracting my bandwidth when it comes to a nervous system level? Because when we notice we're quick to be triggered or we have a short fuse, oh, okay, I'm feeling really, really close to dysregulated today. It's not going to take
Yeah.
much to set me off. And sometimes I'll even tell my husband, like, hey, I got a lot going on. I'm just like feeling at the edge today. Just giving you a heads up, because I know it, right? And I can feel it. And then other days, the same exact thing can happen with my kids and my husband and work, whatever. Because I have such a broader window of tolerance, I can just handle it so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I've found with deep breathing exercises where the more I practice deep breathing, the way I do it is I lay on my back and just for about 5 minutes and I just relax my breathing and I can feel it going from short and shallow in my chest to deep from my belly. And it takes about 5 minutes and all the tension from my shoulders and my neck, it just slowly melts away. And it's almost painful at first when I first lay down because there's so much tension in my shoulders and my back initially. But what I notice is the days that I do that, say once, twice, or three times during the day, I can experience the same levels of stress, but it doesn't stress me out as much because my body is in a more relaxed state because of the deep breathing throughout the day.
Yeah, you've expanded your capacity in 10, 15 minutes. Um, and I just wonder what would happen as, a people if that's like how we spent the first 10 minutes of our lunch break, or if that, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
this is just like when this becomes routine, it's amazing.
true. Michelle, thank you for sharing all these tips. I think my audience is going to really find it helpful for that calling flooded, catching it early, and then learning how, more specifically, how to deflood. If people wanted to learn more about you and your resources, what's the best channel for you?
Awesome. So my podcast is called The Calm Mom. So whether you are a mom or not, we've kind of shifted in the last year, and it's really all just nervous system work for anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout. So tons more tools like this. We are going to rebrand in the fall, so I'm not sure when this comes out. We'll make sure you have the right links, but it's going to be called Alive and Well at that time. So really just all nervous system stuff. And then you can find me on my website at michellegrosser.com and on Instagram at It's Michelle Grosser.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast. If you enjoyed the episode today, be sure to give it a review. The review tells the algorithm that this show is being helpful, and that makes them pump it out to more couples so you can pay it forward. Also, if you're ready to learn better emotional intimacy, better conflict resolution, better communication, enroll in my leading digital course, Marriage Saver Society. You can learn all of my tools from the comfort of your living room. Go to my website, drwyattfisher.com, and click on Marriage Saver Society to learn more. And remember, your marriage is alive. If you care for it and nurture it, it will grow. But if you deprive it and neglect it, it will wilt and die. The choice is up to you. Take care.